Louis, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to talk about behind the scenes in terms of our scholarly and professional life. You and I have always appreciated media literacy as a way to pull back the curtain like the Great Wizard of Oz and see the man and the machine and the simplicity and the weirdness of it all. And it's actually really indicative of your own approach to scholarship that you would be so sensitive to process, reflecting that instinct of good teaching and of the journey of discovery that research really is. Today, what I'd like to do is talk to you about following Lewis's wonderful outline, which really, I think you can see how productive that outline has been for us. Following your outline, Lewis, to make five points about my own sausage making experience, right? As a cook and as a creator. My first point about where the inspiration comes from is, for me, it comes from my activism. When I was about 30 years old, I woke up one morning and I thought, it seems to me like every kid in the United States, all 75 million of them in elementary and secondary schools, should have some exposure to media literacy. Like, how hard is that? And that didn't seem very hard. And I thought, okay, that might take 10 years or so. So let's work on that. Let's focus. Let's focus the energy on getting every kid in an elementary school or high school have one experience with media literacy before they graduate. That didn't seem so hard. But what that did was it forced me to be in deep partnerships. So what inspires me is kind of an impossible dream that has propelled me into a series of collaborative relationships, primarily with elementary and secondary school teachers, but also with other nonprofit and media organizations that are helping me to accomplish that goal. So right now I'm in a deep partnership with 2 school districts in Rhode Island, in Newport Public Schools and the Narragansett Public Schools, and I love the creativity of classroom teachers. It is absolutely amazing. We have such a very different way of thinking about teaching because we might get 12 hours of contact time a week, right? Or 16 if you're really in trouble, right? But elementary and secondary teachers are in the room with children all day long. And their creativity, their improvisational strategies, their classroom management strategies, and their sheer endurance is super inspiring to me. So most of what I do is I observe teachers, I write about teachers, I try to capture their creativity as they try to figure out how to translate these abstract ideas about media literacy into activities that support student learning. I'm a big believer in this idea of balancing strong ties and weak ties in terms of cultivating relationships that help me accomplish my activist goals. So that means I try to be out there widely so that I can establish weak ties with a lot of people. But then I also try to cultivate strong ties that actually lead to partnerships, because those partnerships lead to writing. So weak ties allow me the reach to figure out who cares about this topic, and strong ties allow me to develop multi-year collaborative relationships. So for instance, one of the projects that I'm just now launching, the Mind Over Media project, which is a user-generated website for critically analyzing contemporary propaganda in all its forms. That project happened when I was at a conference that I sometimes go to. Somebody came up to me, handed me her business card, said, I'm working on Nazi propaganda for the Holocaust Museum. I was like, cool, right? Lo and behold, over a series of years, we found the media literacy connection, and then we recognized that it wasn't doing kids much of a service at all if the only time they learned about propaganda in high school was the stuff that happened in 1935 to 1940. That wasn't good enough. That if the only time we teach about propaganda is talking about 20th century Germany, we actually are doing our kids a disservice. We have to teach about propaganda in the 21st century in all its many forms. And that chance encounter led to a really robust partnership. And certainly this project will have its own life. Right now, there's only one scholarly research article that I wrote on this, but this, over the next 3 years, there'll be more. So my first point is about inspiration coming from the strong ties, the weak ties that turn into strong ties through partnerships. The second question you asked us to address, Louis, was this idea of where are our sources of, who and what are our sources? And like many of the panelists, I also get inspired by sort of chance experiences, and being open to chance is pretty important. I found myself with a group of 7th graders a couple years ago, and I was trying to figure out how to talk to them about transgressive media experience. That's really hard, because by definition, 12-year-olds do not want to talk to you about their transgressive media experience, right? They just, no 12-year-old girl or boy is going to say, oh yeah, I've typed in sex, or I've done things online I wouldn't want my parents to know about. That they just don't. They're not going to talk about that in a classroom. So I did a little activity with Post-it notes where it was like, put down a YouTube video that you really like, and put down a YouTube video that like really freaks you out. And from that set of Post-it notes, a little trope kept coming up over and over: the scary maze game. And it was like, what is the scary maze game? So after that session was over, I went back, I discovered the scary maze game. It struck all kinds of chords with me, and ended up writing, doing a content analysis, looking at 100 scary maze game videos on YouTube that were produced in the United States, and 100 scary maze game videos that were produced in Germany, doing a cultural analysis of the differences in how children are represented as victims of a kind of violence, right? And intentionally scaring someone. So my sources include stuff like 7th graders telling me about their YouTube videos. I read a novel once, and I try to read, to keep always a piece of fiction and a piece of nonfiction among my work, and stumbled across a guy named David Shields and his crazy, you can't call it a novel, really interesting, maybe a collage is a better term for this book, Reality Hunger. This book was so bizarre that I found myself thinking a lot about it, and ultimately ended up incorporating some of his ideas into my own work. So I think reading widely as well as reading deeply seems to work for me as a strategy. Right now I'm thinking a lot about creative destruction because I'm reading a book about Cornelius Vanderbilt. He was the guy, he was the coal guy, the railroad guy, the steamship guy, and thinking a lot about his approach to entrepreneurship, and thinking a lot about what in my field needs to be blown up so that new ideas can move forward. So I think reading widely, and especially reading fiction and nonfiction, is really, outside of your discipline, is really important. So that's the second topic. Let me talk about the third issue. You asked us to talk about our work process. And because my work comes from my identity as a doer, my work is, my research process is tied to my outreach. So the data that I collect is always closely tied to the project. It's always organically emerging from the doing, right? So I try not to approach research projects as separate from projects. I think, let's go with the project. The project has a purpose and an audience and a goal, and then it throws off data, or I can, along with the project, collect data alongside it. So for instance, for our Summer Institute in Digital Literacy, which is a professional development program for faculty, that project, its primary goal is as a professional development program for faculty, but it throws off a ton of data, right? And so I think that my identity as an activist and as a teacher-educator and my identity as a researcher are kind of fused. So that makes life really easy. It's not like there's two parts of my brain. It's all the same. It's all the same process. But I want to say one more thing about the work process. This is really my fourth point. And again, I think it is appropriate to nod to Neil Postman here, and in terms of the constellation of talent assembled here, it seems kind of appropriate. When I spent the first 20 years of my life teaching undergraduates. And then I went and had to teach graduate students. And I was like, what is this all about? This is different. And I remember at some point along that journey having coffee or lunch or something with Neil Postman, and I was kvetching, grad students, huh? And he told me about the magic of 7 sentences. And so I have used the 7-sentence magic with my grad students and with myself. Turns out that if you're trying to develop an argument, you should be able to develop the entire argument in 7 sentences in a triangle that goes like this, right? The broadest, biggest way in, that's the first sentence, and then you just keep drilling down until you get to your idea. It's that discovery process that you described, Juliet. So I try to outline my work with the magic of 7 sentences. And once I have the magic of 7 sentences, then I am a weekend warrior. That means I bang out a 4,000-word draft in a weekend, right? Because you can do it, right? Just Saturday and Sunday, boom, you're done. Now, and the reason why that's easy to do is because I have no standards, okay? So if it's on paper, it's good enough as long as I get to 4,000 words. Now, once I have banged out that draft on a weekend, it's weird, but it's like it becomes my precious little baby. I have to take care of it, right? I have to make it better. I spend the first week after the weekend admiring it. Ooh, isn't it got beautiful eyes? Look at that lovely sentence there, right? And I just love it. Then I leave the baby in the closet for a while. Turns out that the baby calls to me. And when I reread it again a week later or 2 weeks later, I reread it and go, those eyebrows need a little, scoofing up, right? This shoulder scar is terrible. Let's patch this part that's weak, right? And I end up taking care of my baby, and pretty soon it becomes something I can show to somebody. And all of my writing is aided by my critical friends who help show me what's not working and who ask me great questions. And I couldn't imagine writing a page without those critical friends who, because I don't have any objective stance on my baby, it's a personal thing you're writing, right? So that's basically my writing process. In terms of technology, I have benefited greatly from using Mendeley. If you're a graduate student in this room and you're not using Mendeley, I would suggest you get yourself right to that website. It's a social knowledge management tool. I use it to digitally annotate PDF documents that I pull off the databases, and I use it to do citation management, but it's really, really helpful for me as I build who are the key scholars that I'm going to be citing in a particular work. And since my memory is so fallible, I remember only the most recent thing I've read or the very first thing I read, it helps me fill in the gaps. The stuff I read 2 years ago that, oh yeah, that actually would be perfect. So really a very helpful tool. Okay, so that's the magic of 7 sentences. Now the last point I want to make. This is this challenge. You identified it as how do you communicate with colleagues, but I'll reframe it a little bit. I'd like to talk about how you get work published. Who in the room is interested in getting work published? Yes, okay, so I have a secret that I'd like to share with you. Because once you learn this secret, it's just amazing how transformative it really is. I call it planes in for a landing. I want you to imagine the Philadelphia airport. Right now, at this very moment, maybe 100 planes are on their way in. Some are still in Chicago, right? Some are coming up from Baltimore. Some are right there in Wilmington, and some are almost on the tarmac. As a creative scholar, you have ideas that are at various places in the queue. Some are simply ideas that are just floating around. Then, next step, you become a weekend warrior, right? And poof, you've got a draft, right? Next, you get that to a conference, right? It becomes a conference paper. Now, for most scholars, that's it. For most scholars, once it gets to a conference paper, back up to the next idea. But no, if you adopt my strategy of planes in for a landing, the idea is let no good writing go unwasted, right? You need to take that conference paper and get it to a journal, right? And then when the reviews come back, you can't just throw those reviews in the garbage. Like some of us, sometimes we do. We get so angry, right? You have to actually respond to that feedback, revise that draft, and move that thing through the process. Now, I admit, sometimes some of my planes have gone missing, right? One of those like Bermuda Triangle events where I don't know where that plane went, it just disappeared. But I maintain a Word doc. It's called Planes in for a Landing. Well, this year it's called Planes in for a Landing 2015. It has everything I have done, and it's organized by category, right? So this is still an idea. This is conference paper. This is out for journal review. This is revise and resubmit or reject, right? This is accepted for publication. This is published. And each 3 months or 4 months, I go back to that list and go, well, now, where are you on this, right? What needs to be pushed forward? What do I need to work hard on? Because it's true, time is a researcher's friend. A piece of writing that you wrote 2 years ago that you gave up on, that you thought was bullshit, right? When you revisit it, you're different now. You're different now. So going back to that manuscript allows you sometimes to see the weakness or the limitation or the gap and bring that thing down for a landing. So, in conclusion, why do we do research? We do research because we don't know what we're doing. That's why they call it research. I think one of the barriers to research productivity is we have attitude problems about it. We've learned today that research is a kind of learning. It's a very personal kind of learning. I think when we approach research with humility, when we recognize that it's just our way of documenting our learning, then we're a lot more humble about it, and we're a lot more accepting of other people's journey, because perfectionism kills creativity. So by having a humble, learner-centered approach to research, we advance our own understanding, and that helps us advance the field.